The radio went dead at exactly the wrong moment. April 18th, 1943. 0847 hours, 18 miles off the coast of Bougainville, Captain Tom Lanphier banked his P-38 lightning hard right, the twin Allison engines screaming as G-forces crushed him into his seat. Through the canopy, nothing but empty Pacific sky. Blue meeting blue, silent, peaceful. He keyed the mic again. Bogey should be right. Then he saw them. 6 dots. Low. Hugging the wavetops like they were trying to hide in the ocean itself. His breath caught. Betty bombers. The silhouette was unmistakable. Those greenhouse cockpits, the rounded fuselage. But these weren't hauling bombs to some random forward base. These were running a precision schedule. Radio intercepts had told them exactly when, exactly where. And in one of those bombers, maybe the lead aircraft, maybe the second, sat Admiral Yamamoto. The man who'd planned Pearl Harbor, the architect of Japan's entire Pacific strategy, the one target that could change the course of the war. Lanphier's wingman, Rex Barber, pulled alongside. No words needed. They'd rehearsed this. Burned extra fuel to time it perfectly. Flown 435 miles over enemy water at wavetop height to avoid radar. Everything. The planning, the secrecy, the fuel calculations so tight they'd barely make it home. All of it came down to the next 4 minutes. He pushed the throttles forward. The P-38 surged, 400 miles per hour, then 420. His thumb settled on the gun trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, all buried in the nose. When you fired a lightning, the bullets came from dead center. No convergence point to calculate. No Kentucky windage. Point and shoot. But something felt wrong. The distance. They were still 3 miles out, maybe more. At this speed, in this dive, he'd overshoot in seconds. He'd have 1 pass, maybe 2 if he was lucky, and the Zeros escorting those bombers were slow to react. He glanced at his ammo counter. Standard loadout. Ball and tracer rounds. Maybe 500 rounds total for the 50 cals. 30 seconds of continuous fire if he held the trigger down. The Bettys were growing larger. He could see the sun glinting off their canopies now. 2 miles. His breathing steadied. Combat breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Every instructor at flight school had hammered it in. Panic makes you miss. Calm makes you deadly. 1.5 miles. The Zero escorts suddenly broke formation. They'd seen him. His heart slammed against his ribs. This was it. The moment. The shot they'd flown across an ocean to take. He centered the first Betty in his gun sight. The lead bomber. The one most likely carrying Yamamoto. 1 mile. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, something impossible. The Betty started coming apart. Not from his guns. He hadn't fired yet, but pieces were separating from the fuselage. Small chunks at first, then larger sections. The right engine nacelle exploded in a spray of oil and fire. He was still 3/4 of a mile away. Barber's voice crackled through the radio. "What the hell? You're hitting from... how?" Lanphier looked down at his trigger. Still not pulled. Then he understood. The new shells. The ones they'd loaded in Guadalcanal. The armourer had been vague about it. Something about extended range munitions and don't tell anyone where you got these. Lanphier had figured it was some experimental garbage that wouldn't work anyway, but the Betty was dying, trailing smoke, banking hard left toward the jungle. He still hadn't fired a single round. The ammunition counter hadn't moved, which meant... The realization hit him like ice water. These shells were killing at ranges that shouldn't be possible. Distances where enemy pilots thought they were safe, where they'd never expect incoming fire. The second Betty erupted. Barber must have been shooting. But from where? Lanphier twisted in his cockpit, spotted Barber's lightning nearly a mile behind him, still climbing. No way! Not possible. Not from that range. The Zeros were diving now, finally reacting, but they were confused. Their bombers were exploding and they couldn't see where the threat was coming from. 2 of them collided, trying to turn into an attack run they couldn't identify. Lanphier finally pulled his trigger. The P-38 shuddered. The nose lit up with muzzle flash, and the lead Betty, Yamamoto's bomber, he was sure of it now, disintegrated. Not damaged, not crippled, erased. The fuselage broke in half. The tail section tumbled away. The cockpit, that greenhouse where the Admiral sat, turned into a fireball that fell spinning into the jungle canopy below. Lanphier released the trigger. 3-second burst, maybe 50 rounds total. The silence in his headset felt enormous. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you could fly. Below, the jungle was burning. 3 columns of black smoke rising into the perfect morning sky. Barbara's voice, quiet, almost reverent. Did we just? Yeah. Lanphier's throat was dry. We just did. But as he banked toward home, toward Guadalcanal, toward the long flight over empty ocean, one thought kept circling through his mind. If these shells worked like this, if they killed at distances where the enemy couldn't even see it coming, what else could they do? The debriefing room smelled like cigarette smoke and sweat. 1430 hours, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Lanphier sat across from Major John Mitchell, the mission commander, and 2 men he'd never seen before. No insignia, no name tags, just dark suits that looked ridiculous in the Pacific heat. One of them was writing in a notebook, fast, not looking up. Mitchell cleared his throat. Walk me through the ammunition performance again. I already told you. Tell me again. Lanphier leaned back in his chair. His flight suit was still damp from 3 hours in the cockpit. First hits at approximately 4,000 feet. Target was 3/4 of a mile out, maybe more. I hadn't even pulled the trigger yet. The man with the notebook stopped writing, looked up for the first time. That's impossible, he said. His voice was flat. Eastern accent. Boston, maybe. Effective range on the M2 Browning is 800 yards under optimal conditions. You're describing... I know what I'm describing. Lanphier kept his voice level. I watched the Betty come apart before I fired. Barber saw it too. He was even farther back. Silence. The other suit leaned forward. Older. Grey at the temples. He looked like someone who'd spent years making decisions that kept people awake at night. Captain, what we're about to tell you is classified at a level that doesn't officially exist. You'll never speak about it. Not to your squadron mates. Not to your family. Not in your memoirs if you survive this war and decide to write them. Understood? Lanphier nodded. The rounds loaded into your aircraft this morning weren't standard ammunition. The man pulled a photograph from his briefcase. Black and white. Showed what looked like a normal .50 caliber bullet, but something about the shape was wrong. The projectile was longer, sleeker. What you fired today was called M903. Development designation HVAP. High velocity armor piercing. The photograph slid across the table. Lanphier picked it up. The bullet in the picture had a tungsten-core. He could see the cross-section, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body. The aluminum sabot falls away after leaving the barrel, the man continued. What remains is a tungsten penetrator moving at approximately 4,100 feet per second, nearly 40% faster than standard ball ammunition. The increased velocity extends effective range to almost 3,000 yards. Maybe more. We're still testing. Jesus Christ! The words came out before Lanphier could stop them. The War Department approved limited field trials 3 weeks ago. Your mission was selected because of the intelligence value. If it worked, we needed it on record. If it failed... The man shrugged. We needed that on record too. Lanphier set the photo down. His hands were steady now, but something cold was spreading through his chest. You used us as guinea pigs. We gave you the best possible chance of completing an impossible mission. The grey-haired man's expression didn't change. Admiral Yamamoto is dead. That's confirmed. His body was recovered from the crash site 2 hours ago. You made history today, Captain. You should be proud. Proud. Lanphier thought about the Betty bomber disintegrating. The way the fuselage had just folded. Like paper in a fire. He'd killed men before. Plenty of them. Shot down Zeros over Guadalcanal, watched parachutes fail to open, saw planes spiral into the ocean trailing smoke. This felt different. The enemy never saw it coming. Never had a chance to evade or fight back. Just erased. From a distance they couldn't comprehend. How many rounds did we load? His voice sounded strange in his own ears. 40 per gun, mixed with standard ammunition to avoid overheating. Ratio was 1 HVAP to every 4-ball rounds. So that's why the ammo counter had barely moved. He'd fired mostly standard rounds. The HVAP shells had done the killing. Mitchell spoke up for the first time in minutes. "What happens now?" The man with the notebook closed it, slipped it back into his jacket. "Now we scale production. If this works against bombers, it'll work against everything. Tanks, bunkers, ships. We're talking about fundamentally changing how air combat operates." "The Japanese don't know what hit them yet," the grey-haired man added, "but they will, and when they do, they'll adjust. We have maybe 3 months, 6 if we're lucky, before they figure out what's happening and change their tactics. We need to maximise the advantage while we have it." Lanphier stood up. The chair scraped against the concrete floor. "Are we done here?" The grey-haired man studied him for a long moment. Something like sympathy flickered across his face, or maybe just calculation. "One more thing, Captain. The official story is that you shot down Yamamoto in a conventional engagement. Standard ammunition, close-quarters dogfight, heroic American pilot versus the architect of Pearl Harbor. That's the narrative. That's what gets released to the press. The real story," he gestured at the photograph on the table, "that stays buried, possibly forever. Why? Because if the enemy knows we can kill them from distances they think are safe, they'll adapt. They'll spread out. They'll change formation flying. They'll develop countermeasures. The weapon only works if it's a surprise. Every single time." Lanphier walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. "Rex Barber, my wingman. He knows too. Major Barber is in the next room having the same conversation." The man's voice was gentle, almost kind. "He'll understand, just like you do." The door opened onto blinding sunlight. Lanphier stepped out into the heat. Across the airfield, ground crews were swarming over his P-38. One of them was removing the ammunition cans, handling them carefully. Like they were made of something precious or dangerous. A jeep pulled up. The driver looked about 17, baby-faced, probably fresh off a transport from San Diego. "Captain Lanphier, Colonel wants to see you, says it's urgent." Lanphier climbed in. As they drove across the tarmac past rows of fighters and bombers being prepped for night raids, he couldn't shake one thought. They'd given him a weapon that killed from impossible distances, a bullet that moved so fast the enemy died before they even knew they were being shot at. And somewhere, in a factory in Detroit or Cleveland or Pittsburgh, they were making more, thousands more. Mesa 2nd, 1943, Intelligence Briefing Room, Port Moresby, New Guinea. Lanphier stood at the back of the room while a colonel from 5th Air Force pinned photographs to a corkboard. Black and white reconnaissance shots, Japanese aircraft in various states of destruction, some on the ground, some clearly photographed mid-disintegration. 17 confirmed kills in the last 6 days, the colonel said. His pointer tapped each photo in sequence, all at ranges exceeding 2,500 feet. Multiple pilots reporting targets destroyed before visual confirmation of hits. The enemy is... He paused, searching for the word. Confused. That was putting it mildly. Lanphier had seen the intercepted Japanese radio transmissions. Pilots screaming about ghost attacks, bombers exploding for no apparent reason. Some were blaming it on new American proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells. Others thought it was sabotage, bombs planted by resistance fighters before takeoff. Nobody suspected the truth. A Captain Lanphier didn't recognise raised his hand. "What's the ammunition distribution plan? My squadron's still running standard loadout." "Limited rollout," the colonel replied. "Priority to P-38 squadrons operating in long-range interdiction roles. We've got production constraints. The tungsten cores require, well, let's just say tungsten isn't easy to come by. Most of our supply comes from China, and that pipeline isn't exactly reliable. So we're rationing miracle bullets," the captain's voice carried an edge. "We're maximising tactical advantage." The colonel's tone sharpened. "Every round counts. Every kill matters. We're not spraying these things at random zeros. We're using them for high-value targets. Command aircraft, bombers, transport runs carrying officers and supplies." Lanphier's jaw tightened. High-value targets, like Yamamoto. The briefing continued. Tactical recommendations, engagement protocols, fire discipline. All the usual military alphabet soup designed to turn carnage into clean bullet points in a report. But Lanphier wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had 3 days ago, late night. One of those rare moments when you couldn't sleep and you found yourself talking to whoever else was awake. Rex Barber, his wingman, sitting on the edge of his cot. "You ever think about what we're doing?" Barber had asked, "and winning a war?" "No. I mean," Barber gestured vaguely at the darkness outside their tent. "We're killing them before they even know we're there. That's not combat. That's not even a fight. It's just execution. They'd do the same to us if they had the capability." "Yeah, probably." Barber was quiet for a moment. "Doesn't make it feel any cleaner?" The briefing room came back into focus. The colonel was wrapping up. "Questions?" A hand went up. Young lieutenant. Fresh face. Probably on his 10th mission if he was lucky. "Sir, what happens when they figure it out? When they realise it's not sabotage or ghost attacks or whatever they're telling themselves?" The colonel set down his pointer. "Then we'll have changed how they fly. Made them scared of empty sky. That's a win too, Lieutenant. Fear is a weapon. Sometimes the most effective one." The room emptied slowly. Pilots filing out, heading back to their squadrons, their aircraft, their missions. Lanphier stayed behind. The photographs were still pinned to the board. 17 kills, 17 aircraft that never saw it coming. He stepped closer, studying the images. Most showed catastrophic structural failure. Wings folding, fuselages breaking apart, control surfaces shearing off. One photo caught his eye. A Betty bomber, photographed from another aircraft. The tail section was just gone, severed cleanly. The rest of the plane was still intact, still in flight, but you could see straight through where the tail used to be. The pilot must have had maybe 5 seconds to understand what was happening before physics took over and the plane tumbled into the ocean. Impressive, isn't it? Lanphier turned. The grey-haired man from the debriefing, the one with no name and no insignia, standing in the doorway like he'd materialised from shadow. "Didn't hear you come in." "That's the idea." The man walked to the board. "Study the photographs with the detachment of someone examining specimens under glass. The M903 is performing beyond projections. Tungsten penetrator maintains velocity better than we anticipated, less drop at extreme range. The ballistic coefficient is, well, you don't need the math. Point is, we're killing at distances the enemy thinks are safe. That bother you at all?" The man looked at him. Really looked, like he was seeing something deeper than uniform and rank. "Every technological advantage bothers someone, Captain. The longbow bothered French knights. The rifle bothered men who fought with muskets. The machine gun bothered everyone. War doesn't care about fair. It cares about winning. Easy to say from behind a desk. I flew in the last war." The man's voice didn't change, but something cold entered it. "Sopwith Camel. Got shot down over the Somme in 1918, spent 8 months in a German POW camp. So don't assume I don't understand what you're feeling." Lanphier said nothing. The man pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Lanphier. Both lit up. Smoke drifted toward the ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead. "They're going to figure it out eventually," Lanphier said. "The Japanese. They'll recover unexploded rounds, analyse them, understand what they're facing. Probably. Intelligence estimates 3 to 4 months before they adapt tactically. Spread formations, fly higher. Increase escort numbers." The man exhaled slowly. "But by then, we'll be producing enough HVAP to equip every fighter in the Pacific. Won't matter if they know what's coming. They still won't be able to stop it." Through the window, Lanphier could see P-38s being armed for the evening patrol. Ground crews loading ammunition cans. He wondered how many of those cans contained the Tungsten-core rounds. How many pilots would kill today from distances that felt like cheating? "What's the endgame here?" he asked. "Air superiority. Absolute and total. We make the sky so dangerous they can't operate. Can't resupply their forward bases. Can't evacuate their wounded. Can't move officers or equipment without expecting to die." The man turned from the window. "Then we island hop all the way to Tokyo and finish this. How many will we kill getting there? Fewer than if we didn't have this advantage." The man stubbed out his cigarette. "That's what you tell yourself, Captain. Every night when you close your eyes and see those Bettys coming apart. You tell yourself that every bomber you stop is another Pearl Harbor that doesn't happen, another Darwin that stays standing, another transport full of Marines that makes it to the beach. He walked to the door, paused. You're scheduled for a mission tomorrow, 0600 hours, Rabaul Harbor. Intelligence says there's a supply convoy forming up, 6 transports, heavy escort. His eyes met Lanphier's. Your aircraft will be loaded with full HVAP complement, all 5 guns. No mixed load. That's a lot of tungsten. It's a lot of enemy supplies we can't let reach the front. The man opened the door. Get some sleep, Captain. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Then he was gone. Lanphier stood alone in the briefing room. The photograph stared back at him. 17 kills, soon to be more. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked almost beautiful if you didn't think too hard about what colours they resembled. Blood and fire. He walked out into the fading light. Tomorrow he'd kill from miles away, watch ships explode and planes disintegrate and men die before they ever knew death was coming. And the day after that he'd do it again, because that's what the weapon demanded, that's what winning required. May 3rd, 1943, Soko was 6:47 hours. Rabaul, New Britain. Lanphier came in from the west using the morning sun as cover. Below, 6 transport ships sat fat and slow in the protected anchorage. Destroyers circled like nervous shepherds. The harbour was a fortress, ringed with anti-aircraft batteries, fighter strips carved into the jungle, early warning radar that should have picked them up 20 miles out. Should have. But the P-38s were flying at 28,000 feet. Higher than most radar could track reliably. High enough that the air was thin and cold and every breath felt like sucking through a straw. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. I count 18 fighters, maybe more. They're climbing. Lanphier watched the Zeros spiral upward from the airfield. Dots against green jungle. They were good, coordinated, aggressive. Climbing in tight formations that maximised their numbers advantage. But they were climbing to meet a threat at 20,000 feet. The P-38s were 8,000 feet higher. Steady, Lanphier said into the mic. Let them commit. Below, the transports were starting to move. Someone had spotted them. Smoke poured from stacks as boilers pushed to full power. The destroyers increased speed, positioning themselves between the transports and the expected attack vector. All their preparation, all their defensive doctrine, built around conventional engagement ranges. Lanphier pushed the stick forward. The Lightning's nose dropped. The altimeter unwound. 27,000. 26,000. 25,000. The first transport filled his gun sight. 4 miles away, he didn't wait, didn't need to get closer. His thumb found the trigger. The nose of the P-38 lit up. All 5 guns firing simultaneously. The sound was enormous, a sustained roar that vibrated through the airframe. No mixed ammunition this time, pure HVAP. Tungsten-core rounds screaming downrange at 4,100 feet per second. The transport erupted, not slowly, not gradually. One moment it was a ship, the next it was a fireball. The explosion was massive. Whatever that transport had been carrying, fuel, ammunition, both, went up in a detonation that sent a mushroom cloud boiling into the morning sky. The shockwave rippled across the harbour. The nearest destroyer actually rolled from the blast wave. Lanphier pulled up, banked hard right. His wingmen were firing now. 4 P-38s, all armed with the impossible ammunition. The tracers looked wrong, moving too fast, too flat. Normal tracers arced. These cut straight lines through the air like someone had drawn them with a ruler. The second transport exploded, then the third. The Zeros were still climbing, still 10,000 feet below. Too far to engage. By the time they reached attack altitude, the Americans would be gone. Lanphier keyed the mic. Fuel check. 60% came the reply, then another. 58. 55. They had maybe 20 minutes before they'd need to turn for home. 20 minutes to destroy everything in the harbour. The 4th transport was burning, not exploding, just burning. Lanphier could see tiny figures jumping from the deck, men choosing drowning over fire. Something twisted in his chest. He lined up on the 5th transport. This one was different, smaller, faster, a destroyer escort, not a transport, meant for combat. Its deck was bristling with anti-aircraft guns and they were firing now. filling the sky with flak that bloomed black and deadly, but they were firing at the wrong altitude. The shells exploded 5,000 feet below the P-38s. Lanphier centered the destroyer in his sight picture. His finger hesitated on the trigger. Below, he could see sailors manning those guns. Young men, scared, doing their job. They couldn't reach him, couldn't hurt him, couldn't even see him clearly at this range and altitude. They were going to die, and they didn't even know it yet. He pulled the trigger. The destroyer came apart along its keel. The tungsten rounds punched through the deck, through bulkheads, through armor plate like it was cardboard. Something critical detonated, probably the magazine. The ship literally broke in half. Both pieces tilted upward, forming a V shape before sliding beneath the water. 12 seconds from first shot to gone. Jesus Christ, someone breathed over the radio. The remaining transport was turning, running for the harbour mouth, trying to escape. The captain must have realised staying put meant dying, but there was nowhere to run. Lanphier's squadron mates were already lining up. 3 P-38s, guns firing, tracers converging on the fleeing ship. It exploded so violently the blast wave reached up to their altitude. Lanphier felt his aircraft shudder. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. Just burning oil on the water and debris floating among the wreckage. 6 ships. Gone. Maybe 3,000 men dead. All in under 4 minutes. The Zeros had finally reached attack altitude. "Break. Go home," Lanphier ordered. The P-38s banked east. The Lightnings were faster in level flight. The Zeros couldn't catch them, couldn't even follow. They'd burned too much fuel in the climb. Lanphier looked back once. Rabaul Harbour was a graveyard. Smoke pillars rising from 6 different locations. The water reflecting fire. Destroyers circling uselessly, searching for survivors who were probably already dead. And on the airfield he could see more fighters scrambling. Too late. Always too late. The flight back to Port Moresby took 2 hours. Nobody spoke. When they landed, ground crews swarmed the aircraft. Lanphier climbed out, legs shaky, ears ringing from the sustained gunfire. His crew chief was grinning. "How'd she perform, Captain?" Lanphier looked at the empty ammunition cans being removed from his Lightning. "Perfectly," he said. The word tasted like ash. The debriefing was clinical. Numbers and coordinates and kill confirmations, 6 ships destroyed, estimated 2,800 enemy casualties, 0 American losses. The mission commander called it textbook. Lanphier sat through it in silence. When it ended, he walked to the mess tent, grabbed coffee he didn't drink, sat at a table in the corner where the light didn't quite reach. Rex Barber found him there an hour later. "You okay?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." Lanphier stared at the cold coffee. "We killed 3,000 men today. They never had a chance. Never even got close to shooting back. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre," Barber finished quietly. Neither spoke for a long moment. "You remember flight school?" Barber finally asked. "All those lectures about honour and courage and meeting the enemy in combat? All that chivalry bullshit they fed us?" "Yeah. They were training us for a war that doesn't exist anymore." Barber leaned back in his chair. "This is what modern war looks like. Technology versus technology. Whoever has the better weapon wins. Whoever hesitates loses. That make it easier for you?" "No." Barber's voice was flat. "But it keeps me flying." Through the tent opening, Lanphier could see maintenance crews working on the P-38s, loading more ammunition, fueling for the next mission. Tomorrow there'd be another target, another convoy or airfield or supply depot, and he'd kill from miles away and watch men die before they knew death was coming. Because that's what the weapon allowed. That's what winning demanded. He stood up. The coffee stayed on the table untouched. "Where you going?" Barber asked. "To write letters." "To who?" Lanphier didn't answer, but in his mind he was already composing them. Letters to families he'd never meet. Parents who'd never know their sons died in a harbour in the South Pacific, killed by a weapon that made war feel less like combat and more like execution. He wouldn't send them, of course, but he'd write them anyway, because someone needed to remember that the numbers in the debriefing report, those clean clinical kill confirmations, had names, had faces, had families waiting for them to come home. The weapon let him kill from miles away, but it couldn't kill the part of him that remembered they were human. August 17th, 1943, 3 months after Rabaul. The war had changed. Lanphier could see it in the way Japanese formations flew now. Spread out. Irregular spacing. No more tight bomber streams that made easy targets. They varied altitude constantly. Jinked randomly, even when no threat was visible. Sometimes they'd abort entire missions if the sky felt wrong. They'd learned. Not about the HVAP rounds specifically. Intelligence said the Japanese still hadn't recovered an intact round for analysis. But they'd learned that death came from distances they'd once considered safe. That empty sky could kill. That the Americans had somehow extended their reach beyond what physics should allow. Fear. Just like the colonel had said. And it was working. Sort of. Lanphier sat in the briefing room at Dobodura Airfield, New Guinea, listening to the latest intelligence summary. A major from MacArthur's staff was presenting, pointing at maps, citing intercepts, drawing arrows that represented troop movements and supply routes. Japanese air operations have decreased by 41% in the last 60 days, the major said. They're conserving aircraft, avoiding engagement unless absolutely necessary. Our HVAP-equipped fighters have achieved a kill ratio of 11-1 in the same period. 11-1. Those were numbers that won wars, but Lanphier kept thinking about the cost nobody mentioned. The tungsten supply chain that was constantly breaking down. The factory workers in the States pulling double shifts to machine those tungsten cores. The pilots who'd become dependent on a weapon they didn't fully understand. Captain Lanphier, he looked up. The major was staring at him. Sir, you've logged more HVAP combat hours than anyone in theatre. What's your assessment? Are we seeing diminishing returns? Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Lanphier stood slowly, walked to the map, studied the coloured pins representing airbases, supply routes, front lines. The weapon works, he said finally. But the enemy's adapting. They're not giving us the targets we had in April and May. No more fat convoys running predictable routes. No more massed formations. They've gone to small units, irregular schedules, low-altitude approaches under radar coverage. So we're losing the advantage? No, we're losing the easy kills. Lanphier tapped a spot on the map. Wewak, a major Japanese airbase. They're still flying, still resupplying, still fighting. They're just being smarter about it. We need to be smarter too, the major frowned. Meaning what? Meaning we stop using HVAP like a magic bullet. We use it strategically, high-value targets only, save it for moments when we need the extended range, not just because we can. Silence. A colonel in the back spoke up. We have production at 10,000 rounds per week now. Why would we ration? Because they're expecting it. Lanphier turned from the map. Every time we fire HVAP, we're teaching them, showing them what we can do. What if we go back to conventional tactics for a while? Let them get comfortable again, then hit them when they've relaxed. The major exchanged glances with the colonel. That's actually not a bad idea, he said slowly. We'll kick it upstairs. See what command thinks. The briefing ended 20 minutes later. Lanphier walked out into brutal afternoon heat. The airfield shimmered. P-38s lined the taxiway, props spinning, engines warming up for evening patrol. He could smell aviation fuel and hot metal and the jungle rot that never quite went away. His crew chief jogged over, young kid from Oklahoma, couldn't have been more than 20. Captain, your bird's armed and ready. Full HVAP loadout like you requested. Change it. The kid blinked. Sir? Standard ammunition, ball and tracer, no HVAP. But the mission brief said... I know what it said. I'm changing it. Standard loads. Lanphier kept walking toward his aircraft. Trust me. The kid hesitated, then ran back toward the armory. Lanphier reached his P-38, ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was hot from sitting in the sun. Someone had painted a scoreboard under the canopy. 17 small Japanese flags representing confirmed kills. 17 planes that had died at impossible ranges. His squadron mates were gathering for the pre-flight brief. 8 pilots, all experienced, all alive because they'd been given a weapon that let them kill before the enemy could shoot back. He thought about that first mission. Yamamoto, the Betty bomber disintegrating. The feeling of godlike power that came from reaching across miles of empty air and erasing a life. 3 months later, that feeling was gone. What remained was just weariness. and the knowledge that every technological advantage eventually became standard, that today's miracle weapon was tomorrow's expected capability. That war didn't care about innovation, it just consumed it and demanded more. "Flight lead, you ready?" Lanphier turned. His wingman, not Barber, who'd rotated stateside 2 weeks ago, was standing there. New guy. Fresh face. Eager. "Yeah, I'm ready." They flew the mission that evening. Patrol route over the Bismarck Sea, looking for Japanese supply barges attempting to reinforce isolated garrisons under cover of darkness. Lanphier found 3 barges just after sunset. Small targets, wooden hulls, maybe 30 men total aboard all 3. He dove from 15,000 feet, got in close, 500 yards, close enough to see individual figures scrambling across the decks, close enough for them to see him coming, close enough for them to shoot back, their small caliber deck guns tracing orange arcs through the dimming light. He fired. Standard ammunition. Same rounds pilots had been using since 1941. They worked fine. The barges burned. Men jumped into the water. Some would survive, swim to shore, fight another day. But they'd seen him coming, had fought back, had died in combat, not execution. It was a small distinction. Maybe it didn't matter at all. But as Lanphier climbed back to altitude and turned for home, something in his chest felt slightly less heavy. September 1943. The war ground forward, island by island, airfield by airfield. The HVAP rounds became standard issue across the Pacific Theatre. Production ramped up. The technological advantage became doctrine, became expected capability. The Japanese adapted further, flew at night when long-range precision was harder, used weather as cover. Developed new tactics that minimized exposure to high-altitude threats, and the Americans adapted to their adaptations. Back and forth, move and counter-move, the ancient dance of predator and prey, now played out at 400 miles per hour and 5 miles high. Lanphier flew his final combat mission in October. 96 sorties, 23 confirmed kills, 0 losses. They sent him home with a chest full of medals and orders to help train the next generation of fighter pilots, to teach them how to use the weapons that kept improving, kept extending their reach, kept making war more efficient and more distant and somehow more terrible. The last thing he did before boarding the transport to Hawaii was visit the maintenance hangar. Found his old P-38 being prepped for the next pilot. The scoreboard under the canopy had grown, 32 flags now. Someone else had been flying it. Someone else had been killing from miles away. He ran his hand along the fuselage one last time. The metal was cool, evening had fallen. Across the airfield, more P-38s were taking off for the night patrol. Their engines were distant thunder. Their lights disappeared into darkness. Somewhere out there, men were dying at ranges they thought were safe. Tomorrow someone would improve the ammunition further, extend the range another 1,000 yards, make the killing more precise, more efficient, more inevitable, and the day after that, someone would improve it again. Because that's what war demanded. That's what winning required. Lanphier walked away from the aircraft, toward the transport, toward home. Toward a future where the weapon he'd helped prove would become standard, would become expected, would become just another tool in the arsenal. The shell that let the P-38 kill from miles away. Japan had learned the hard way. But the lesson wasn't about the shell. It was about what happens when you give men the power to kill without being seen. When you turn combat into mathematics and distance into advantage, and death into something that arrives before warning. The lesson was simple. Technology doesn't make war cleaner. It just makes it easier to forget you're killing human beings. The transport's engines roared to life. Lanphier climbed aboard, found a seat in the back. Through the window, he could see the airfield falling away, the P-38s, the hangars, the jungle beyond, all of it fading into darkness and distance. Just like everything else in this war.